I recently finished Scored to Death, your book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, especially as someone who just devours music scores and soundtracks. Can you kind of give us the origins of Scored to Death?
That's a tough question because you could look at it two ways. Either the origin is mid-90s, and I see In the Mouth of Madness for the first time at a sleepover, at a birthday sleepover for me. Had a couple of friends sleep over in the mid-90s, and I rented In the Mouth of Madness. So it either starts there, or you could say it starts in college when I go full, I go hog wild on horror movies, and I fall in love with the music of Goblin. More directly, it starts in, I want to say, 2013. I bought a book online from England, and I don't remember the title of it, and it's for the better because it's not a positive story, and I certainly don't want to shit on somebody else's work. And it's not that the book was bad. It just wasn't what I was looking for. It was a book that was exploring sound in Dario Argento movies, and it had all these interviews with people. And I read... If I'm going to pick up a book and I'm going to dedicate time to it, it's usually nonfiction, either about music or about film, whether it be about a genre or an autobiography or a biography. And that's just the kind of stuff that I'm drawn to when I read. And so I was looking forward to this book. It got lost in the mail. They had to send me another one. And it came in. It was tiny. It was like a pamphlet. And I was reading the interviews, and they were fine. They just weren't. It wasn't the information I wanted to know. So I started looking for other books like it that might have that information, and I couldn't find it. Right around that time, I interviewed somebody. Actually, that's not a story that's worth going into. But right around that time, I also saw Goblin came to America and toured for the first time. It was the new Goblin lineup, but here in America, they were going around as Goblin. And I was absolutely in love with Goblins from the late 90s and 2000 or 2001, whenever that Claudio Simonetti Daimonia album came out. To this day, that album is Desert Island disc for me. When I was editing educational videos, I didn't have a car because I actually sold my car to pay for my senior film in film school. And I lived up in Westchester, so I had to take public transportation. So I had to take a bus to a train. So my commute was like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And then I had to walk from the train station to work, which was like a half-hour walk. And I wasn't tech savvy. So for the first year or two, I dug my Walkman out. And this was back when Howard Stern was still on terrestrial radio. And so in the morning commute, I would listen to Howard Stern on FM radio. And on the way home, I had one tape that I made. It was a blank tape. On one side was Rock and Soul, Hall & Oates' Greatest Hits, Volume 1. And on the other side was Daimonia. And I listened to this tape every day on my way home from work. That weird dichotomy kind of fit any urge, any mood I was in would be quenched by either one of those things. And so the Demon was coming. And I had bought the Back to the Demon album a couple of years before, which didn't have Claudio Simonetti. And look, I was just into it. It was, what can I say? I was a demon. I was a Goblin nerd, and so I was super psyched. I had the new Goblin live in Rome already. I bought an import of that, and so they were coming, and I went to Brooklyn to see them. I brought a friend of mine, and I just couldn't have been happier. It was like I was in heaven. And during, I think it was, they played Simonetti's theme from Phenomena, which had a particularly rockin' kind of breakdown thing in it. And I just looked around, and it was a sold-out crowd, and everybody was so into it, and it was kids in their 20s to people in their 40s and 50s, and I just was like, man, like these are my, these are my people, and it was amazing that this Italian progressive rock band that, people that are very into music, a lot of them will never have heard of, could sell this place out. And it was just amazing because it's not something that ever would have happened in 1997 when I fell in love with their music. The internet changed everything.
Oh, yeah.
It united fans, and it made things available that were never made available before. And so I left that show with a combination of that book, and I could have the timing wrong. I could have found that book after the show. I could have looked for that book after the show and got it. I kind of recall that it was before, but either way, they were around the same time. And I just could not find a book that talked to Claudio Simonetti about Goblin. And that's really what it was. And I said, I want to talk to Claudio Simonetti about Goblin, but I would also like to talk to John Carpenter and Fabio Frizzi and Jay Chataway, who did the score for Maniac. And I was like, I started compiling this list of scores that I loved that were horror movie related, and I wanted to find out about the scores. And when I couldn't find a book that did that, then the question was, well, maybe I should do it. I had been writing for that blues website, and for that blues website, I had been interviewing a lot of people and musicians like Leslie West from Mountain and stuff like that, and Steve Cropper, who's from the Blues Brothers and from Booker T and the MGs, and plays on Carpenter's Ghosts of Vampires score. And so it wasn't like, it wasn't something that seemed that far out of reach. I was already interviewing people, but then it was, well, maybe I should get a book of interviews that isn't covering horror movies, but just to see what kind of what's out there for these composer interviews. And I got to one of those, and it was a great book, but it was a little bit more heavy on music theory and stuff than I would have been able to do. So then there was this question of like, I want to read this book. Maybe I should do it, but maybe I'm not the right guy to do it. And so I went to a friend of mine who was the audience for this book, the guy who I fell in love with a lot of this music with, some of which he introduced me to. And I said, I'm thinking about doing this book, but I'm not sure I'm the right guy to do it. And after talking, we kind of came to this conclusion, well, maybe I should just do a couple of interviews and see how they turn out. And if they don't turn out good enough to pursue a book, then I could find some place online to post them. They wouldn't go to waste. I could maybe, I had been around that time, I had been writing for Dread Central sometimes, or Fangoria.com, and I certainly could have posted them on Dion's other site for Podwits. And so I went and I pursued it, and I reached out to people, and thinking that most people would say no or not respond at all, I reached out to a bunch of people, and miraculously most of them responded yes. And all of a sudden I had like 6, 7, 8 composers saying, yes, I'll do it. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm doing it now. And so I just dove in. I just said, okay, I guess it's this idea of doing 1 or 2 and seeing how they turn out is not going to happen now, because I've now kind of shot myself in the foot and offered this to a bunch of people, and they all want to do it. And so in early 2014, so the Goblin show was around Halloween of 2013, and then I started thinking about what I would do, started doing research and reaching out to people. So really the work started at the end of 2013, but the first interview was early February, I think. Harry Manfredini, who did Friday the 13th. And then the very next day, Alan Howarth, who worked with Carpenter on a lot of his 80s, most of his 80s output. And I was off to the races, and that's kind of how it started.